Okay, so here we are. We're going to do chapter 4 and 5 of Flat Stanley. And for your reference, there you go. Flat Stanley's over there in the book. And without further ado, we're going to go with the reading. Flat Stanley, chapter 4 The Museum Thieves. Mr. and Mrs. O.J. Dart lived in the apartment above the lamb chops. Mr. Dart was an important man, the director of a famous museum of art downtown in the city. Stanley Lambchop had noticed in the elevator that Mr. Dart, who was ordinarily a cheerful man, had become quite gloomy, but he had no idea what the reason was. And then at breakfast one morning, he heard Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop talking about Mr. Dart. "I see," said Mr. Lambchop, reading the paper over his coffee cup. "That's still another painting that has been stolen from the famous museum. It says here that Mr. O.J. Dart, the director, is at his wits' end." "Oh dear, are the police no help?" Mrs. Lambchop asked. "It seems not," said Mr. Lambchop. "Listen to what the chief of police told the newspaper. We suspect a gang of sneak thieves. These are the worst kind. They work by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. However, my men and I will keep trying. Meanwhile, I hope people will buy tickets to the policeman's ball and not park their cars where the signs say don't." The next morning, Stanley Lambchop heard Mr. Dart talking to his wife in the elevator. "These sneak thieves work at night," Mr. Dart said. "It is very hard for our guards to stay awake when they have been on duty all day. And the famous museum is so big we cannot guard every picture at the same time. I fear it is hopeless, hopeless, hopeless." Suddenly, as if an electric light bulb had lit up in the air above his head, giving out little shooting lines of excitement, Stanley Lambchop had an idea. He told it to Mr. Dart. "Stanley," Mr. Dart said, "if your mother will give her permission, I will put you and your plan to work this very night." Mrs. Lambchop gave her permission. "But you will have to take a long nap this afternoon," she said. "I won't have you up till all hours unless you do." That evening, after a long nap, Stanley went with Mr. Dart to the famous museum. Mr. Dart took him into the main hall, where the biggest and most important paintings were hung. He pointed to the huge painting that showed a bearded man, wearing a floppy velvet hat, playing a violin for a lady who lay on a couch. There was a half-man, half-horse person standing behind them, and 3 fat children with wings were flying around above. That, Mr. Dart explained, was the most expensive painting in the world. There was an empty picture frame on the opposite wall. We shall hear more about that later on. Mr. Dart took Stanley into his office and said, "It is time for you to put on a disguise." "I already thought of that," Stanley Lambchop said, "and I brought one. My cowboy suit. It has a red bandana that I can tie over my face. Nobody will recognize me in a million years." "No," Mr. Dart said. "You will have to wear the disguise I have chosen." From a closet, he took a white dress with a blue sash, a pair of shiny little pointed shoes, a wide straw hat with a blue band that matched the sash, and a wig and a stick. The wig was made of blonde hair, long and done in ringlets. The stick was curved at the top, and it, too, had a blue ribbon on it. "In this shepherdess disguise," Mr. Dart said, "you will look like a painting that belongs in the main hall. We do not have cowboy pictures in the main hall." Stanley was so disgusted he could hardly speak. "I will look like a girl. That's what I would look like," he said. "I wish I had never had my idea." But he was a good sport. So he put on the disguise. Back in the main hall, Mr. Dart helped Stanley climb up into the empty picture frame. Stanley was able to stay in place because Mr. Dart had cleverly put 4 small spikes in the wall, one for each hand and foot. The frame was a perfect fit. Against the wall, Stanley looked just like a picture. Except for one thing, Mr. Dart said. Shepherdesses are supposed to look happy. They smile at their sheep and at the sky. You look fierce, not happy, Stanley. Stanley tried hard to get a faraway look in his eyes and even to smile a little bit. Mr. Dart stood back a few feet and stared at him for a moment. Well, he said, it may not be art, but I know what I like. He went off to make sure that certain other parts of Stanley's plan were taken care of, and Stanley was left alone. It was very dark in the main hall. A little bit of moonlight came through the windows, and Stanley could just make out the world's most expensive painting on the opposite wall. He felt as though the bearded man with the violin, and the lady on the couch, and the half-horse person, and the winged children were all waiting, as he was, for something to happen. Time passed. He got tireder and tireder. Anyone would be tired this late at night, especially if he had to stand in a picture frame balancing on little spikes. Maybe they won't come, Stanley thought. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come at all. The moon went behind a cloud, and then the main hall was pitch black. It seemed to get quieter too, with the darkness. There was absolutely no sound at all. Stanley felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle beneath the golden curls of the wig. Creak! The creaking sound came from right out in the middle of the main hall. And even as he heard it, Stanley saw, in the same place, a tiny yellow glow of light. The creaking came again, and the glow got bigger. A trapdoor had opened in the floor, and the two men came up through it into the hall. Stanley understood everything all at once. These must be the sneak thieves. They had a secret trapdoor entrance into the museum from the outside. That was why they had never been caught. And now, tonight, they were back to steal the most expensive painting in the world. He held very still in his picture frame and listened to the sneak thieves. This is it, Max, said the first one. This is where we art robbers pull a sensational job whilst the civilized community sleeps. Right, Luther, said the other man. In all this great city, there is no one to suspect us. Ha ha, thought Stanley Lambchop. That's what you think. The sneak thieves put down their lantern and took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. What would we do to anyone who tried to capture us, Max? The first man said. We would kill him. What else? His friend replied. That was enough to frighten Stanley, and he was even more frightened when Luther came over and stared at him. This sheep girl, Luther said. I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, Max. This one looks scared. Just in time, Stanley managed to get a faraway look in his eyes again and to smile. Sort of. You're crazy, Luther, Max said. She's smiling. And what a pretty little thing she is, too. That made Stanley furious. He waited until the sneak thieves had turned back to the world's most expensive painting, and he shouted in his loudest, most terrifying voice, Police! Police! Mr. Dart! The sneak thieves are here! The sneak thieves looked at each other. Max! Said the first one very quietly. I think I heard the sheep girl yell. I think I did too, said Max in a quivery voice. Oh boy, yelling pictures. We both need a rest. You'll get a rest all right, shouted Mr. Dart, rushing in with the chief of police and lots of guards and policemen behind him. You're all you'll get arrested, that's what. Ha ha ha. The sneak thieves were too mixed up by Mr. Dart's joke and too frightened by the policeman to put up a fight. Before they knew it, they had been handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning, in the office of the chief of police, Stanley Lambchop got a medal. The day after that, his picture was all in the newspapers. The Daily Sentiment, the paper, said, "Hero, flat boy helps capture odd thieves." Chapter 5. Arthur's Good Idea. For a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, Agnes, over there. That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves," and things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and the staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley did not mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came a further change, and it was not a pleasant one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Hello, Super Skinny!" they would shout, and even ruder things about the way he looked. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids I mostly mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different. Flat." "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion for that matter, or the color of their skin." "I know," Stanley said. "Only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps," said Mr. Lambchop, "but they can try." Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and knelt by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get tangled the day you were my kite, I guess." "Skip it, will you?" Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Go away." "Please, let's be friends." Arthur couldn't help crying a little too. "Oh, Stanley," he said, "please tell me what's wrong." Stanley waited for a long time before he spoke. "The thing is," he said, "I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular shape again, like other people. But I have to go on being flat forever. It makes me sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet and could think of nothing more to say. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want the folks to worry. That would only make it worse." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." He took hold of Stanley's hand. The two brothers sat together in the darkness, being friends. They were both still sad, but each one felt a little better than he had before. And then, suddenly, though he was not even trying to think, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light and ran to the big storage box where toys and things were kept. He began to rummage in the box. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some lead soldiers and airplane models and lots of wooden blocks. And then he said, "Aha!" He had found what he wanted. An old bicycle pump. He held it up, and Stanley and he looked at each other. "Okay," Stanley said at last, "but take it easy." He put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and clamped his lips tightly about it so that no air could escape. "I'll go slowly," Arthur said. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand at me." He began to pump. At first, nothing happened except that Stanley's cheek bulged a bit. Arthur watched his hand. But there was no wiggle signal, so he pumped on. Then, suddenly, Stanley's top half began to swell. "It's working! It's working!" shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so that the air could get around inside him more easily. He got bigger and bigger. The buttons of his pajama top burst off. Pop, pop, pop. A moment more, and he was all rounded up, head and body, arms and legs. But not his right foot. That foot stayed flat. Arthur stopped pumping. "It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons," he said. "Maybe a shake would help." Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley Lambchop as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," said Mr. Lambchop. "Up and talking when you ought to be sleeping, eh? Shame on—" "George," said Mrs. Lambchop, "Stanley's round again." "You're right," said Mrs. Lambchop, noticing. "Good for you, Stanley." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them. And then they turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Stanley and Arthur. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon, all the Lambchops were asleep. The end. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk about what other book we're going to read for next time. All right? Now, before we go, I want to try something else here. Let's see. We had the thanks for watching. Oh, we also have a full check mark. Boop. Or a X, which is no good. Oh, we can just take that out. We don't need that. There you go. We can have this. Or not. So that's it for now, and I'll see you girls later. Bye-bye.